Why are more and more banks suddenly turning to XRP, even though this coin was massively criticized for years? Take a look at this, a network that processes transactions in seconds, at costs that are practically zero. The obvious answer is clear: speed and efficiency. But that's not actually the real reason why everything is changing right now, because most investors don't even understand what's happening in the background. And that's exactly what we're going to take a closer look at now. Hi, I'm Marius from 10x Invest. On my channel, I analyze stocks and cryptocurrencies using over 20 data-driven metrics. I'll link the full explainer video up here or in the video description. Today, we're going to take a detailed look at XRP. So grab yourself a coffee and feel free to leave a like for me. And then let's get started right away. And if you want to see which altcoins are currently on my watch list for the next bull run, or if you want to see my complete investment program, then check out the 10x Elite info in the video description. So what exactly is XRP to begin with? XRP is the native coin of the so-called XRP ledger. This is a blockchain designed specifically for fast and inexpensive payments. It was developed for this purpose. And that's exactly the crucial difference compared to many other cryptocurrencies. Because while Bitcoin is more like digital gold, XRP is about a completely different topic: global payments. And the problem with that is the following. If you want to send money from one country to another today, it often takes several days. On top of that, there are also extremely high fees. And above all, banks have to keep capital on hand that is tied up. And this is exactly where XRP comes in. The network makes it possible to transfer money in just a few seconds and to do so worldwide, essentially without an intermediary, and all at extremely low costs. What's special about it is that XRP can be used here as a so-called bridge currency. This means that different currencies can be connected directly with each other, in this case, without banks having to hold large sums in reserve. And that's exactly what makes the system extremely interesting for banks and financial institutions. But beyond the payments sector, the XRP ledger is also currently evolving. In other words, new features like DeFi, tokenization, or even stablecoins are being integrated. This means that XRP is no longer just a payment network, but is developing into a complex, complete infrastructure for digital assets. And this is where things really start to get exciting. Because the question is not just what XRP can do, but how much it is already being used, and where the real opportunities, but also the risks, lie. So let's get started right away with the first key figure, the market capitalization. XRP is roughly at $83.6 billion US. This puts XRP among the top 5 cryptocurrencies worldwide. That's it. Of course, this shows one thing: this is no longer a small experiment, but something that is already firmly established in the market. And naturally, that also raises an important question. How much growth is even possible here, and where are the limits? So next, let's take a look at the supply, meaning the circulating amount. Currently, over 61 billion XRP are in circulation out of a maximum of 100 billion. This means that more than 60% are already on the market. Of course, this already reduces the risk of sudden inflation. At the same time, however, there are monthly releases from the so-called escrow system, although a large portion of that is locked up again. But what does this mean for investors in the long term? That's exactly why we're going to take a look at the roadmap now. And it's surprisingly clearly structured. The focus is clearly on DeFi, tokenization, and new features like lending directly on the blockchain. Additionally, work is being done on data privacy through zero-knowledge technology. And this shows one thing: XRP continues to evolve. From a pure payment network to a complex financial infrastructure. But can the team really implement this ambition? That's the question. Let's take a closer look at the team now. Here we see one of the greatest strengths, with Brad Gellinghouse as CEO, for example, and Chris Larsen as co-founder. Behind XRP stands a team with years of experience in the financial sector. In addition, there are 500 employees worldwide. This is no longer a small startup, but rather a globally positioned company. But is a strong team really enough now to stand up to the competition? And this is exactly where we come to the narrative as well. XRP stands for institutional payments, tokenization, and the connection of traditional financial systems with the BB blockchain. And this narrative fits perfectly with the current market trend. Especially, of course, due to topics like stablecoins and digital central bank currencies, it is extremely exciting. Nevertheless, the narrative alone is not enough. What is always more decisive is which real problem is actually being solved. And this is where it gets really interesting, because XRP addresses a huge problem. As mentioned, global payments are slow, expensive, and inefficient. But the market behind it amounts to over $150 trillion annually. And this is exactly where XRP comes in, with transactions in just a few seconds and extremely low costs. But does the system actually work in reality? A look at its usage shows yes. Over 300 institutions are already using Ripple's technology, and the network handles around 1,500 transactions per second. That's a clear difference compared to many other blockchains. But the question now is, how sustainable is the system's structure? This brings us to a frequently underestimated point: energy efficiency. XRP is among the most efficient networks out there. The annual energy consumption is extremely low, and the network is even officially climate neutral. This is especially important for institutional investors. But who is actually financing all this growth? When we look at the investors, things get even more interesting. We see big names here like Pantera Capital, Galaxy Digital, or Citadel. Recently, around $500 million were raised, and this shows that there is enough capital available to continue driving development forward. Now the question is, how strong is the competition in this area? Because XRP is not alone. Projects like Stellar, Lumen, or of course the traditional Swift systems are direct competitors. But XRP has a clear advantage, namely existing partnerships with banks. This naturally creates a certain barrier to market entry, but is that really enough to remain dominant in the long term? Of course, marketing is also an important point. Ripple focuses heavily on institutional partnerships, meaning less hype and more real integration into existing systems. And that's exactly what ensures sustainable visibility. But why do so many people misunderstand XRP? That is mainly due to the simplicity of the idea. At first glance, XRP is easy to understand. It's about fast and inexpensive payments, no complicated concepts. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful for widespread adoption. But so what does the long-term vision look like now? The vision is clear. XRP wants to become the global settlement layer for payments, for tokenizing assets, for example. And of course, for the digital financial system. That's a very big goal. But what about the supply structure now? XRP has a maximum supply of 100 billion coins. There is no inflation here, only minimal fees are burned. This already ensures a stable supply structure. But how fair is the distribution really? A portion of the coins continues to be controlled by Ripple. That's far from optimal. And that's exactly the biggest point of criticism. One of the largest holdings is concentrated in just a few wallets. That could theoretically influence the market, of course. The question is, how strong is the actual usage? But now, here, things turn positive again. XRP is actively used. As a bridge currency, in other words, it's already in use in payment transactions, and of course, its use is increasing, now also in the DeFi sector. Network activity remains consistently high, but what does that tell us about the community? The community is one of the largest in the crypto market, the XRP army. Millions of users worldwide, very active on platforms like X and Reddit. That naturally draws a lot of attention, especially during important market phases like the last bull run. But what will happen in the future? This brings us to the upcoming events. New features like lending, more DeFi functions, and an expansion in the stablecoin sector, plus possible institutional developments. So here we see many potential catalysts. The question now, of course, is which of these will actually have an impact? And now it gets really exciting because we've just looked at all the key figures. But what does all of this mean in the bigger picture? Where do the biggest opportunities lie? And above all, of course, where are the risks that many people completely underestimate? Currently, XRP has a score on my 10, ranking list of 82.5%. This clearly places the altcoin in the category of strong fundamentals, very high up. If we take a closer look at this data, in other words, how this score is put together, we can see three major strengths in particular. I'll also display all 20 key figures here now, and how the result actually came about. This clearly makes XRP one of the strongest projects. Let's take a look at the three biggest strengths. So a real-world problem is being solved with a market of over $150 trillion, strong institutional usage and partnerships, and a clear positioning in the area of global payments and tokenization. At the same time, as always, there are also risks. Above all, the centralized distribution of the coins is suboptimal, and the fact that XRP is already an extremely large coin means that extreme growth is rather limited. And with that, we come back to the question at the beginning of the video. Why are banks suddenly changing their thinking? And the answer is actually quite clear, because XRP solves a real problem. And it's faster, cheaper, and more efficient than existing systems. On the topic of SWIFT, this altcoin is becoming increasingly interesting for institutions. Now, things are about to get really exciting as we take a look at the chart. Where is XRP right now? What are the price targets? And when would I personally get in now? Let's get started with the chart analysis for XRP. First, let's take another look at the overall situation. It was listed here on the exchange. This is Coinbase now. Back in 2024, we already had a massive surge here. It really shot up. But then came the massive crash. Now, as always, let's first look at the different price scenarios. We have the bear case, which is at 0.68. That would be another minus 50% from now, so quite a significant downgrade. This is also in those lower areas where there were already some resistances before ultimately, and of course also support. Then let's look at the normal scenario. That would be more around the $2. If you look at that, it would be around 40%. Then the bullish scenario would be $4.75. We'll take a look at that too. That would be roughly, bon appetite, 31%. That would be a little higher than the eventual all-time high here. Let's take a look, but now, Vision 2030. Things are definitely looking up. That would be over $23. If you take a look at this. From now on, again, approximately, that would be another roughly 15 to 16 times, so 1,600%. That would of course be a massive increase. Of course, that's only possible if the entire crypto market really explodes in the next bull run. And if XRP once again massively gains market share in the end, and ultimately if adoption happens and the altcoin season finally really takes off. But let's take a look at the current situation now. What does it look like at the moment? Here, as you can see, a large red dot has formed. That indicates that we were overbought. It was also overbought here. We were then pushed down a bit as well. Then we had a small green dot form here, short term. We were also pushed up a bit. This indicates a bullish trend reversal here. But now, as you can see, it's a bearish trend reversal again. So in other words, theoretically, it could now go a bit further down, even further. From my point of view, there is still a lot of room to the downside here. That's why I personally would also be cautious with XRP at the moment, because we were in overbought areas here and there is still a lot of room to the downside. If you want to use the indicator for your personal analyses, you can get it. On the one hand, in the 10x Elite, but also separately from that. You can take a look at everything. The link is in the video description. It could happen that we continue to go down here and then maybe down here. For example, a big green dot forms. That would be a sign, okay, we're back in the oversold zone. In other words, for me personally, that would be an opportunity to look further and see when it makes sense for me to enter, now that you've seen the complete analysis of XRP. I have another interesting coin here that is backed by BlackRock. Why is BlackRock backing it? Everything here. Thanks for watching and see you soon.